All right, our last one. Kenley Jansen comes on home to the Dodgers. He was actually the one that I most pictured, that video montage and all those big saves that he's had. You could always use relief pitchers at the deadline, and it feels like he's going to get moved. So another big contract coming over to the Dodgers. Is this last year? I think it is. That would be the one thing that I think would hold it up, is if he had another season, but I'm pretty sure it was a 2-year deal. So Jansen going back to the Dodgers, I think it makes a lot of sense.
For sure. And look, they could use that in the ninth inning. I mean, Evan Phillips, no knock on him. He's been fantastic, but anytime that you can maybe take your best reliever and not have to save him for the final 3 outs and say, no, we're going to save this guy for the most important 3 outs late in the game, whether it's in the 7th or the 8th, that's just going to make your pen all the more better. And Jansen going back to the club he started out as a catcher in. I mean, shoot, that's perfect. That's poetic. And I definitely could see that one happening. I think I might like that one the most, more than any of them.
You know what? It might just be, and I was looking, I'm like, all right, well, how's he doing this year? A 1.69 ERA, strikeout per 9, over 11. I mean, he is just ageless. Is Craig Kimbrell doing good as well? These guys, man, they just find a way to produce every year. It's pretty impressive. And they, too, will have some interesting Hall of Fame cases, because we know how tough it is to get into Cooperstown as relief pitchers. But, I mean, you get close to 500 saves, and they're both getting there. You got Kimbrell at 425. Jansen at 425. They're tied. So yeah, we'll see. That's the thing with both of them. I feel like they're at a point in their career where they're like, I'm just pitching the 9th inning. I don't care what team. Just give me the 9th inning. I got to get saves because I'm trying to get to Cooperstown.
Yeah, they are the last in a breed. I think even basically the generation before theirs, there weren't really that many of those lockdown closers. It was Francisco Rodriguez, still waiting for him to get in the Hall of Fame. Just before him, it was Billy Wagner, and then you had the Hoffman and Mariano Rivera era. But Wagner still not in the Hall of Fame. Your guy there, Billy Wagner. So closers are by no means kind of a lock anymore to make the Hall of Fame. I mean, people probably be really surprised when they look at the all-time lists of saves and say, how is the guy with the 7th most amount of saves? How have I never even heard of this guy? How have I never heard of John Franco? Like, talk about, throwing shade on the value of a save, but he doesn't even get whispered about as being like this Hall of Famer, right? Because he doesn't have that same resume of being like a lockdown guy. But again, it was still in those early days in the late 80s and all throughout the 90s. So yeah, Kimbrell and Jansen, I think their postseason success is it's going to maybe tip the scales a little bit. Wagner had a lot of that too, but I think Kimbrell and Jansen have had a little bit more than those guys, and they're definitely creating a lot more separation from Aroldis Chapman, a guy who, going back to about 2021, it was those 3 guys were in lockstep. And I can remember at the All-Star game in Denver talking with Craig Kimbrell about, the Hall of Fame a little bit. And, are you thinking about that? Because guys get to that stage where there might not be Hall of Famers yet. There's a case, but they can add to that case, right? You have to compile a little bit after being dominant. And Kimbrell's in that compiling stage and doing well. So is Jansen, whereas Chapman, not as much. The bloom is off the rose for him, and so it's going to be a lot harder for anyone to make the case that Chapman should be in the Hall of Fame. And that's just talking about his on the field record.
Yeah, the morality clause, he's out. He's been out. It's you mentioned John Franco. At first, when you said that who had the 7th most saves, I'm like, am I going to know this guy? And then you throw John Franco at me. Yes, I know John Franco. But interesting that Kimbrell and Jansen literally just passed him. And by the end of this year, they should pass K-Rod, and they would be right up against those 3 guys that are in the Hall of Fame: Mariano Rivera, Trevor Hoffman, and Lee Smith. Was Lee Smith a Veterans Council guy? Or Veterans Committee guy?
Yeah, he was. He did not get in on a ballot because, again, thinking about he jumped around for so many teams. That's another one of those things. I think players will get a little bit of extra credit if they stayed with one team, the entirety of their career. But when you jump around as much as someone like Lee Smith did, he was even a Yankee for a minute. It's sort of like, well, no one really wanted to keep you around that much, and you compiled a lot of this statistic that wasn't really valued as much at the time. And, he was the guy that both Hoffman and Rivera had to pass on the way to the most career saves all time. So yeah, Lee Smith, who was he was a veteran guy. He did have to wait a little while though.
Yeah, he did for sure. And I don't think anyone's ever going to touch the 600 saves that Hoffman and Rivera put up, but who knows if anyone's ever going to touch the 500 that these guys might get to. I think they're 36 years old. Do they have 3 more years left? They can average 25 a year, get those last 75 saves. I'm rooting for them. I always want to see these guys reach their milestones. That's the other thing about Justin Verlander. It's like, I think one of the reasons he was excited to go back to the Astros was getting wins. And unfortunately this year, not getting a lot of wins. I think he needs 42 more to get to 300. So milestones, very important in Hall of Fame cases for sure.
Yeah, and I think we've started to back away from those milestone numbers because the game has just changed so much in the
Yeah.
last 20 years as far as what's considered valuable. Now metrics are valuable, so that those kind of traditional stats, whereas RBI really is it's important, right? I mean, you look at the leaders in RBI every year, and you go, oh, all these guys are great. Well, there's guys that are also playing incredibly well. I think it was Jose Altuve didn't have 10 RBI in the entire month of April, and he was the best player in the American League, right? So uh, those stats and the pitcher win, where again you got to get past that fifth inning, and you got to be fortunate enough to have your bullpen to hold that down, and that's really out of your control. It's kind of why quality starts is a stat that has a lot of value, but we don't talk about the all-time leaders in quality starts, right? That's not
Yeah.
necessarily something you're striving for. So in a very short amount of time, we went from 300 being the magic number for pitcher wins to 200, like that. Like in 10
Yeah.
years, it dropped down that low.
I think that's why Verlander wants 300 so bad, because he would probably be the last one. I can't see anyone sniffing it. I mean, it might be 150 one day. We're like, oh, 150 wins, man. What a great career. So yeah, the numbers are definitely changing, and it's good that hopefully voters will adjust to that. And when you get to Hall of Fame cases, like there was an interesting talk about guys like Chase Utley and David Wright this year, as far as just having great peaks, but not reaching the milestones, and are they considered Hall worthy? And both of them did better in the voting than I think I would have expected. So
I would agree with that. I would
yeah,
agree. I don't think their peaks were that elite. I think they were
yeah,
that tier below. You're like, oh no, this is one of the best players of the generation, but not Sandy Koufax like elite, where you say you don't see Sandy Koufax on any leaderboard, and yet he's revered as being one of the greatest pitchers of all time because of how high his peak seasons were. He just didn't have any longevity. Utley and Wright. Utley had a little bit more longevity, but that was as a bench player. That was as a role player, whereas Wright had
yeah.
his career kind of, taken out from underneath him with those back injuries. So I think Wright almost has a way better case than Chase Utley.
And yet the voting, I think Utley got like 30. I don't even get how
It was
Utley
a
got.
lot.
He
It
got
was
like
a
30 or 40% of the vote. I was stunned. I mean, I thought Wright was going to fall off the ballot, so I was happy to see he got to hang on there for a little bit, so still be discussed. But when I saw that gulf between Utley and Wright, I mean, this is getting to the point where guys are being voted for the Hall, and I watched their whole careers, and I'm like, in what world was Chase Utley ever a better player than David Wright? And that's obviously people see the Mets flag behind me, and they say, well, that's why he's saying it. But I don't know. I was there in those years. I don't remember Utley being that guy, but hey.
Yeah, I think Utley is an intangible guy, right? Where
Yeah,
there's some really strong numbers for him again at second base, a position where you typically don't get that much offense, and so he was providing a lot of different intangibles, a lot of behind the scenes, good clubhouse guy. So like for that, he gets a boost, but overall his numbers didn't reach 2,000 hits, right? So yeah, David Wright definitely a much more impactful player, I feel like, but they are very very similar if you take a 10,000-foot view with careers that really weren't that long and weren't able to really reach a lot of the typical milestones.
and yet Utley might be in 2 years by the trends. Crazy.